I ask the government today to build these students a new school.
Tonight, Kashechewan urges the government to make equality for First Nations children a priority.
People who want to have the tree for firewood, but that's not what it is.
And Yellowknife's Dene decide how to preserve a ceremonial tree blown over by high winds. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. It was the first day back for federal members of Parliament, and they were greeted by a noon-hour demonstration. Kashechewan Cree Nation will no longer send their elementary-aged kids to portable classrooms. As Todd Lamoran reports, they want the government to listen to a simple message.
Now it's time to speak up for a new school.
Arthur Kousis is one of several youth and children who crowded the steps of Parliament, down here from the Kashechewan Cree Nation located on James Bay.
I've been in that school personally, and into an actual proper school. I can see the difference. It's really different.
Those portables are not safe. Those portables have health issues. How can you watch this happen?
Member of Parliament Charlie Angus uploaded this video a few days prior. He shows the wet conditions under the portables, points out the dangerous conditions above ground. Kashechewan leaders will no longer allow their children to attend these portables.
So I ask the government today to build these students a new school.
But a brand new school is a long-term goal, because Kashechewan is negotiating with the federal government to move from their flood-prone location. Estimated to cost between $500 million to $1 billion.
If the government can reach into their back pockets and buy a pipeline for $4.3 billion, I'm pretty sure they can do the same thing with Kashechewan, less than $1 billion.
Indigenous Services Minister Jane Philpott promised to move quickly on discussing relocation.
This is something that I will be speaking to my cabinet colleagues about and already have to make sure that we can make this a priority. It's absolutely essential that these children have access to a good education.
She says the government will fully support a short-term solution of an interconnected modular school to replace the portables.
We have to look at it very closely to see if it's viable, and then if it is viable, then maybe we'll consider it.
But community distrust was on hand when Philpott addressed the gathering.
We need to work together on behalf of these kids. Among these kids here, among these children here are the leaders of today and tomorrow.
I've heard it many times, so many times over the years, same thing. I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what to believe anymore.
In the meantime, many of these kids will have to share the community's high school. They'll attend classes in the morning, while the high schoolers will go from 1 to 7 in the evening. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The Union of BC Municipalities has passed a resolution to reject open-net fish farms along the west coast. APTN's Tina House has more on the story.
Chief Bob Chamberlain has been fighting to save wild salmon for years. He said wild salmon is the lifeblood of many Indigenous nations.
It's not simply a menu choice. It has become, by and large, who we are and a very central piece of our culture and our traditions.
And the fight to save wild salmon has now been endorsed by the Union of BC Municipalities. Last week, they passed a resolution that rejects open-net fish farms on the West Coast. Resolution A2 reads, "The proliferation of open-net fish farms with non-native fish species threatens local waterways and wild fish species, undermining the economic, social, and ecological well-being of local communities." Many open-net fish farms have been established in Indigenous territories in the absence of adequate consultation with Indigenous governments, undermining the shared objective of reconciliation and respectful relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous governments.
To me, it's the people of British Columbia speaking and demanding a precautionary principle, which is, of course, in the Fisheries Act, to be implemented here on the coast of BC.
Sean Hall is a spokesperson with the BC Salmon Farming Association. He says the 120 open net fish farms might have to shut down.
Mandating that we move salmon farming on land is essentially legislating the industry out of business in British Columbia.
And Hall says the piscine reovirus is not from fish farms.
There's been a lot of research into PRV, and it appears that the strain that's found here in the Pacific is just naturally here in the water, as many viruses are, and it's different than the virus that you find in Europe.
However, marine biologist Alex Morton says research that she has done proves them wrong.
Only 5% of wild salmon are infected with the piscine reovirus up near the Alaska border. But when you get to areas where there's salmon farms, infection rate jumps up to 37 to 45%. Now, research I published in 2013 traced the lineage of the virus in British Columbia back to Norway. In Washington State, they traced the lineage of piscine reovirus back to Iceland, where they were buying their eggs.
The BC government will be meeting with First Nations leadership on September the 27th to let them know their decision on the future of fish farms in BC. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And we'd like to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. Also, you can follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. RCMP and Manitoba are partnering with an Indigenous initiative to help end violence against women and children. This is the second year RCMP are teaming up with the Mummified campaign, but the first year it's province-wide. For the next month, RCMP detachments across the province will be holding community events to raise awareness about gender-based violence. The Mummified campaign was started in 2011 by Paul Lacerte and his daughter. Support for the campaign is demonstrated by wearing a moose hide pin. Since starting, more than 1 million pins have been distributed across the country. Events will conclude on October 18th, the national gathering and day of fasting in Ottawa. Lacerte says the next step is creating an online course for men and boys.
We're developing online training that will go hand in hand with the Mummified Square so that men gain the tools that we need to just be normal human beings again and be in loving and compassionate conversation, sometimes with strangers, about a really difficult issue that we need to address together. But that skill set is something that we're moving into now.
Two ancient discoveries are being hailed as the most significant find of mammal remains ever located. That story and more coming up after the break. Here's a look at Tuesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. A sunny high of 29 for Fredericton, 24 and rain in Charlottetown. Sun and 9 for Happy Valley Goose Bay. Rain in Nain with a high of 5. 27 and rain in Saguenay and Quebec City. 29 with rain for Montreal. A sunny day and 28 for Windsor, London, and Toronto. 15 under the sun in Thunder Bay. 19 with rain for Wawa. 7 with rain in Puckatawagan. 9 in Norway House with rain. 16 under the sun in Winnipeg. 29 and sunny in Brandon. 11 with rain for Yorkton and Regina. 9 and sunny in Saskatoon. 4 with a rain-snow mix in Stony Rapids. 1 degree warmer in Uranium City. Welcome back. Two ancient mummified animals are the stars of a new display at the Trondak Witchin Cultural Center in Dawson City, Yukon. One of the discoveries is the only known mummified wolf on the planet. Luke Smith was in Dawson and brings us the story.
People in Dawson City are clamoring for a view of what could be the most significant find of mammal remains ever found.
When you see the animal in the flesh, and this is flesh, this is real flesh, with skin and hair and eyes, it it truly brings this ancient world to life for us.
2 incredible discoveries were made in 2016. The first, an 80,000-year-old caribou calf, found on the traditional land of the Kashechewan. As Yukon's lead paleontologist for the finds, Grant Zazula supervised the excavation and the removal.
When we went out to the site, we found a volcanic ash where the caribou had been found, and we know that volcanic ash, it was studied by one of our colleagues at the University of Alberta, a geologist, and we know that that ash is 80,000 years old. So an 80,000-year-old caribou calf, it's probably the oldest mummified soft tissue in the world.
Zazula says the rare find of a specimen as old as the caribou was very exciting. But the wolf right beside it added more thrill to that summer.
When we got the phone call that a caribou calf was found 1 week, and then a couple of weeks later a wolf pup, we were just shocked.
The wolf pup was found by Neil Lovelace. He's a 4th-generation miner in Yukon.
I happened to come across what I thought originally just looked like a moss ball, but it looked kind of funny, so I gave it a little bit of a kick with my foot to check, and it just didn't look right, so I had to bend over to see what it was, and sure enough, as I was moving the rocks, I started to find what I originally thought was maybe a miner's dog.
Both remains were taken to Whitehorse and then sent to Ottawa for over a year to be prepared for this display in Dawson. Scientists are still puzzling how these ancient animals were so perfectly preserved.
So I suspect what happened is it was a baby wolf that was in its den. Maybe its mother, her mother went away to go hunting or scavenging, and maybe the den collapsed and the animal got buried instantly and frozen inside the permafrost.
Paul Josie can't wait to get back to Old Crow and share his experiences with his community.
I'll go back. I'll definitely tell some of the younger generation, because this is something that will spark interest in their young minds.
Specimens like this need to be shared with the world, and there's no point in having it sitting in a science lab, staring at it with a microscope. And that's, to me, that's one of the most important parts of science, is getting that information out so people can learn and take away information from these discoveries.
Both animals will be on display in Dawson until the end of September. Then they're off to the Beringia Center in Whitehorse. Luke Smith, APTN National News, Dawson City.
Pretty crazy. Dene and Yellowknife are coming together to share stories of a special landmark that was knocked over during some bad weather in August. Our reporter Charlotte Moore Jacobs attended a ceremony to honor the sacred spot.
It's moving day, but it's no routine job for arborists, because the tree they are dealing with has a history older than you and I. This is a sacred tree for Dene people.
It's our job as Yellowknife Dene to do the right thing for the tree.
The tree came down in high winds last month. Now it will be moved to a cultural site.
I know there are people who want to have the tree for firewood, but that's not what it is.
And
it's people have been calling us for firewood, and they don't understand.
The tree is part of a creation story.
Our tribes at that time had trouble with the beaver.
Fred Sangris explains that the tree came after the Dene were helped by Yamaja, a gifted man who fought off a giant beaver flooding the area.
We're working to try to find a way to preserve the tree even after it fell down. We still regard the tree as very spirited and still alive.
All to honor the tree which stood beside the river and held deep spiritual significance.
Up on the hill there is where the Yellowknife Dene warriors and the hunters used to sit there. Their job was to protect the people and the children that play in this area, that fish here.
Many came out to honor the tree.
You know, in the future, when we're gone, that the story will still be there, told by the youth of today, and I think it's quite important that we, as Dene, show our young.
For Chief Edward Sangris, the tree gave him guidance.
When I first became a chief, it was overwhelming, the amount of work that had to be done. And so I paid respect to the tree, and I asked the tree to help me throughout my journey as a chief. And so far, it's been really good, and it helped me along the way. And
everyone held their breath as the tree was moved. As you can see behind me, crane operators have now safely moved the sacred tree to the Welladay site, but the work here is not over.
We're going to be asking people, what shall we do with this tree once the rest are there? How can we look after it? What shall we do?
Onlookers showed respect to the tree by clearing away fallen pieces, taking some with them.
I'll put it somewhere so it can protect my home and be with me.
While the tree has reached its final resting place, the spirit lives on in the hearts and minds of all. Charlotte Mark Jacobs, APTN National News, near Yellowknife River.
The work of an Anishinaabe artist is featured on a new silver coin from the Royal Canadian Mint. Willow Fiddler spoke with her today in Thunder Bay.
You shouldn't have to flip a coin to decide if Tecumseh is an important part of history. The Royal Canadian Mint is taking care of that with a new silver coin. Mary McPherson is the Anishinaabe artist chosen by the Mint to illustrate the Shawnee war hero as they commemorate 250 years since his birth.
And on one side there's the American eagle, and then on his other side there's the British lion to kind of represent how he had sided with the British and then fought against the Americans in the War of 1812. And then above him there's the Shawnee star that kind of represents him. And I wanted to hint a little bit at the Indigenous worldview that he was coming from. So I have kind of like the weather systems and the trees in the background.
McPherson said she relied on historical interpretations of Tecumseh because there are no accurate images of him. But it was also important to research the historical context of the man who united Indigenous nations.
Tecumseh had sided with the British not because he particularly liked them, but because he saw them as the lesser of two evils, that being the British and the Americans. So Tecumseh had really fought for his own people and for the independence and well-being of his people.
The visual arts student at Lakehead University was invited by the Mint to submit her work for consideration before she was selected. She doesn't have her own coin yet, but her father and a neighbor have made orders. McPherson said she hopes it inspires Canadians to learn more about Indigenous history.
When Canadians might look at this, they might kind of look into the history and the context and how things still happen today and how that affects today's societies.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
Time for another quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Here's the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast. Picking back up in snowy northern Alberta. 8 is the high for Peace River and Fort McMurray. Rain and 7 for Red Deer and Calgary. Rain and 12 for Medicine Hat. A sunny day on the west coast. 18 in Campbell River. 17 for Victoria. 26 under the sun in Fort St. John. 7 with rain in Fort Nelson. 13 in Mayo, 10 in Whitehorse, 0 for Rock River. 5 and sunny in Wrigley, 5 with snow for Fort Simpson. -8 and snow for Sax Harbor, snow and -5 in Pawatuck. +4 for Repulse Bay, 6 above for Chesterfield and Whale Cove, where there'll be some rain. Snow and +1 for Aglulic and Arctic Bay. Welcome back. An organization that represents Francophone youth throughout Manitoba has been interested in doing their share towards reconciliation since the TRC published its report in 2015. With First Contact, the group saw an opportunity to learn, discuss, and engage in the conversation. Our Melissa Ridgen recently spoke with the president of the Provincial Youth Council, Derek Bentley.
So, Derek, what about this show, First Contact, made you want to gather as a group to watch and discuss it?
Yeah, for sure. So for us, watching the trailer, it was so shocking to just think about all the people around us that probably had similar opinions. So we said, well, what better way to watch it than to make sure we had time to discuss after the fact about what we were feeling, what we were thinking, and perhaps try and start coming up with solutions on what we could do.
And did solutions come up in the discussion?
Wow. Definitely a little bit. So I think a lot of it was about ourselves and just kind of having an openness and having those conversations with our friends, but also people that maybe we don't talk to so often around what we are thinking, and just kind of getting that conversation going is probably a great start.
I like that. And so how many people were in the group?
Yeah, so it kind of varied from night to night, from 10 to 30. What was really great is that we would watch the episode, and as we are a Francophone organization, we were then able to do kind of a sharing circle after in the language of your choice. So most people spoke French, but it was really open to everyone. So it was a really great way to debrief after each episode.
And you had people who were of First Nations backgrounds, elders, I understand, too, had joined your group?
Yeah, for sure. So the organization who started it was the Conseil Jeunesse Provincial, the Provincial Youth Council, but it was in partnership with the Franco-Manitoban Cultural Centre, and for me the key part was with the Union Nationale Métisse de Saint-Joseph du Manitoba, which is a Métis organization that's been around for over 130 years, and we were able to involve them and some of their elders in sharing with us as well.
I love it. And so what did your group take away from this when everybody left at the end watching the last episode? What was the discussion that followed? What do you think everybody sort of left with? What was the takeaway?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to what I left and took away, and for me it was really that those conversations, and I think we saw it in the episode right at the end, how just having those conversations, how people's views can change and adjust, and maybe not to the point where we'd all like, but how everyone can have that little piece inside of them that maybe changes a bit, that it might take a year or 2 years, but down the road will stay with them forever about maybe their views need to be a bit different on Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Have you heard anything from buzz outside of the group? I mean, this is aired all over the place and it's being talked about, especially online. What type of comments have you heard from other people who weren't part of the group?
Yeah, overall, the thing I keep hearing is, when is season 2 coming? So I think it's really exciting, and I think in a lot of ways it's an entry point for people to perhaps start having those conversations that are hard to have, and it gives everyone a reference point. So from what I'm hearing from around me, it's kind of that jumping off point now that we've seen the show, we've seen the episodes. How can we keep going? How can we keep having that conversation happening? So overall, really, really positive.
Super. Well, thank you, Derek, so much for joining me and sharing with what your group shared.
Thank you.
Anyone who was out and about in Winnipeg over the last few decades saw Fast Freddy around. He was always going somewhere, dressed to the nines, and the hair was never out of place. His real name was Alfred Joseph Dumas. He moved to Winnipeg from St. Rose-de-Lac when he was still young. His friends gave him the name Fast Freddy because that's who he was. Back in the day, he was one of the best snooker players in town. Black ball, 2 banks to the corner. In places like Obie's on Main Street, the bus depot on Portage, and Las Vegas and Bourbon Street across from the bay. But Fast Freddy was also a family man and always had the time of day for a cup of coffee and a good story for everyone. Fast Freddy passed away in Winnipeg last week. He was 78. Sad news to leave on. That's your APTN National News for this Monday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.